Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Louis Falgout.
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu. Get Recc'd is our bi-weekly podcast where every week I will recommend something to Louis, he will recommend something to me, and then in the following week we'll talk about it. We have another unintentional themed episode today for you all. We're going to be talking about some video games.
That were both released in the year of 2017.
Yeah, those which the devil wrought. We wasted our brains for you all these past 2 weeks.
Yeah, we were listening to a lot of Devil's music, Devil's entertainment. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is thematically consistent with one game here, so that's nice.
Yeah. So we thought we'd get in the spirit.
For sure.
We cast out the good Lord, but that's what we do here for you, the fans.
If you're uncomfortable with that, I strongly suggest you stop watching because we will have, by the end of this show, whenever that may be, I mean this specific episode here, you'll basically be a Satanist. So I hope you're ready for that.
Yeah, and we're going to say probably some curse words.
There's a possibility.
Yeah. Like bastard.
Yeah, and heck.
And heckin'.
Yeah. So watch out.
I'd just like to call out that we're streaming at an interesting time. To kind of date this episode, we're streaming literally during the start of the big game. We're not allowed to say the other words.
Right.
So we call it the big game here. But just to let you know, this podcast that we're currently recording, and I don't want to speak too soon, but we all know it to be true, is the Super Bowl of podcasts, the big game of podcast episodes.
Yeah. That was what we had going into episode 26. I'd highly doubt, no, I'm pretty certain it's not the 26th big game, but you can go ahead and pretend that it is. So that way, it seems like we were clever and had planned this out from the start, when actually that's not at all what happened.
Yeah, all of the episodes before this led up to this episode. So actually, if you go back, you'll hear little nods to this episode, and then it's like one big collective football cinematic universe that we've crafted here for your ears and your eyes.
Yeah, and all of the clues were structured in the order of the Fibonacci sequence. So I really hope that by the time you've gotten to this episode, you've opened your third eye.
And what's important to know is that Louis and I actually have been competing in every episode. And this is the final showdown. So that's why this is the Super Bowl of podcast episodes. After this one, nothing will matter. Our lives will again become meaningless. But for this next probably around an hour, you can strap yourselves in and get ready. Now, we do have a referee on call. So just in case any of us, either Louis or I, make a bad decision, have a penalty, they'll let you all know. They'll chime in. They're Satanists as well, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, so just be on the lookout for anything. We do have them tied up, and they can't speak though, but they are on the call. So just to let you know.
Yeah, we have a face cam for them, but I'm not going to be putting it up anytime soon because it's a bit of a disturbing sight.
Yeah, it's actually an ear cam. We just have a camera on their ear. Because this is a podcast episode, we want them to be able to hear it. So you'll be able to see in real time them hearing the podcast.
You can watch as their ears react to every shocking second of Get Recc'd podcast, including this incredible 4-minute intro that has
Referee's
really
ear reacts to wonderful podcast episode. You won't believe what happens next.
And
what will happen? And what will happen next is we're going to talk about the first thing that we recommended last week. That was what Louis recommended to me. So, Louis, why don't you tell the people what that is?
Yeah, so last episode, I recommended to Steven the video game What Remains of Edith Finch. This is a walking simulator video game released in 2017, kind of artsy game, and I'll turn it over to Steven to begin to talk about it with spoiler-free for the moment, but probably not for long.
And this was developed by the same group that developed Unfinished Swan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Probably
Other
have
things.
a nod. They have a little nod to that game in this one too, which is it was kind of a blatant Easter egg. Like you can't miss it, but if you didn't know what it was, then you probably would have missed it.
Right.
Lewis, I think we just have to put the spoiler tag up. I'm just gonna say before we do, you really can't talk about this game without spoiling it, I feel like.
That's true.
So if you don't want to know what happens, just don't listen to this portion.
Put it on mute and come back when you see the next game is up. Good luck with that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because I will say that this game is absolutely worth playing, and I wouldn't want to get it spoiled if you have not yet. Okay? So anyway, go ahead, Steven. Spoiler tag's up.
Okay. So this game, so I've played a couple in the genre of walking simulator. And this one gripped me in a way that they usually don't. I think what's interesting about this game is how the story is broken up between the different rooms. So I guess since the spoiler tag's up, I'll just talk about kind of the structure of the game. So you play as the title character, Edith Finch. Your mom just died and she gave you a key to the house that you grew up in, but she doesn't tell you what the key does. The family has what they perceive as a curse where only one person in each generation survives. After Edith Finch was the only one to survive, or so they thought. In her generation, her mom boarded up all the rooms to all the other Finches that are kind of left in this static shrine. So the key that you ultimately get allows you to enter into the other family members' rooms through secret entrances. And the game is broken up in such a way to where you go into each family member's room and read some sort of journal entry or something that was important to them. And it starts a little mini gameplay segment that kind of takes you through how they died. I want to start by saying that this game is freaking depressing.
Yeah.
At every opportunity. There is no happy ending here. It is just sad. And the one that really got me was the guy who ends up living secluded in their basement. He lives in their basement. You play this segment where every day you're just doing the same thing, opening a can of food and eating it. And then one day he finally decides to break himself out. He does so and then immediately gets hit by a train.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's that one.
I mean, you're dealing with a game here where it can't possibly not be depressing because the entire purpose of the game is seeing how people died. That is the entire purpose of the game. So every single sequence just involves somebody dying. But I think what got me the most about this, and actually it's funny because I didn't find it depressing. I think it moved me in a lot of ways. Some of the death sequences are like oddly beautiful and kind of enlightening. I think of the one with the little girl who dreams she's a bunch of different hungry animals, and is then eaten by herself as she dreams that she is a tentacle creature. It is very bizarre. But sequences like this are just sort of it's extremely creative, first of all, and I feel like one of the coolest things is that it's for a while I think the game does a great job of getting you to actually believe in this curse, because very early on it's like the deaths are just like, I think that's the first one, if I'm not mistaken, that you play.
It is.
And like that's so absurd, you know, and ridiculous that it's like there's no way, right? You're like, there's no way that's actually what happened. But later on in the game, after you learn how people died, you see in the environment that that death sequence affected the world in some way. I think of, there's one where a boy says he swung around the swing set so much that the swing set went over the branch that it was attached to, and like you know, he was able to do a complete 360 around what the swing set was attached to, which if you've ever been a kid and been on a swing, you've probably thought of that. And then when you enter that area as Edith Finch, when you go outside and enter the area where the swing set is, you actually see the swing set curled around the branch. And there are other moments too that are like that aren't coming to mind. But like, I think by the end of the game, you don't even question anymore that these ridiculous deaths and these fantastical sequence of events actually occurred.
Yeah, a lot of the sequences are surreal in a really interesting and creative way, and a portion of that is the notes that were left behind in a lot of cases were kind of made more fantastical by the grandma, who was sort of this creative thinker. And like an example is, she claimed that her husband died because he was eaten by a dragon, but in reality, he was building a dragon slide that crushed him. And so in a lot of that way, you get kind of that nod to the fantastic in a lot of these stories. So for instance, you mentioned the one with the little girl. What actually happened was she ate a holly berry and poisoned herself. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that she probably, in a way, before she died, started to hallucinate these dreams and might have written those down in her journal as she was hallucinating. So there are a couple of those. There are some really creative ones. One that comes to mind is one of the girls was a babysitter at the time. Her parents left to go do something, and it was Halloween night. And she used to be a child star, and it all plays out in this comic book that's told like a Tales from the Crypt story. And you're watching this unfold, and you're slowly playing certain segments, and it has a very comic book art style as Edith is reading the comic book where this happens. And it ends up that there was a house break-in, and who knows if it was true or not, but apparently it was all the people who wanted her to be there for the convention, and they ate her or they dismembered her or something. But at this time, any of this could be true.
And
I think what's really...
Oh, I'm sorry about that sequence. Did you notice? Because it's really subtle, but in the house, there's a sequence in that comic book where she falls off the top floor, breaks through the railing, and lands on the in the living room. And actually, in the house on the top floor, at the exact location in the comic where she broke through the railing is busted and has been rebuilt. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of little things like that throughout the game too, if you pay close attention to the stories and kind of look around the world. I think that to me is the mark of a good, what they call quote unquote walking simulator adventure game like this, is because you have free movement. I think what makes this game so great to experience is that you're reading these stories, you're experiencing these stories firsthand, and a lot of them have very different gameplay segments as well. But then also, since you have free movement around the world, you can kind of experience and see these little subtle nods. Just to talk about the world, I think the game is really pretty. I really like the look of the house too. It has its own character, which is really unique. They basically kept building it up, and it has like this, and you can see it in the picture that we have on the screen now, but it has like this odd tower that just kept rising out of the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it looks almost unreal.
And it's also amazing too, as in the latter half of the game when you actually start exploring that area of the house, like being that the gameplay in this game is mostly, I mean, between these sort of sequences where you see the history of your family, given that the gameplay is just walking through the house and that's pretty much it, it's very essential that that environment that you're walking through is interesting to explore. And it sparks your curiosity, and I feel like this game does an amazing job of that, because from the moment the game begins, when you're walking towards the house and you see it in the distance, you're curious as to what everything actually looks like, what it actually is, and it definitely does not disappoint in that regard. Just going through this environment is so bizarre, and it's so again, it's just so incredibly surreal.
I think probably my favorite gameplay segment is when you're learning about the baby who ended up drowning.
That was also that was my favorite as well.
And it's this very weird section where you're the baby in the tub and you basically become his little frog toy. And it's hard to even really describe, but you're kind of hopping around and there's little bat toys that are following you and jumping with you. And it's just a very weird kind of out there segment that is just so creative.
But I found that one to be the biggest downer for me. I think
absolutely.
When the baby imagines himself becoming like the size of the toy and goes down the drain, and then of course it's so beautiful. The music is amazing, and like the way that the whole thing's choreographed, it's so graceful, and it's like it's so hard to describe the feeling that this portrays. Like it feels like joyous and powerfully sad at the exact same time. And I have no idea how they pulled that off, but
and I think what best encapsulates that is then the her brother, who works at a factory, a canning factory, and it's this just oddly joyous and celebratory approach to essentially suicide. He's a drug addict, and he's in therapy, and he starts to fantasize every day, and you're just playing out his imagination and the sequence of him fantasizing to eventually it leads to his suicide.
And something I want to mention about this sequence that I found just incredible about this section of the game. The way the gameplay in this section works is you are him at the canning factory, taking the fish, moving them to the little guillotine that chops the fish's head off, and then you throw them into the next section of the assembly line over and over and over again. You do it all with your mouse. You just make that hand movement over and over and over again. And as you're doing that with the mouse, you see what he's imagining. It's like this fantasy world where he's becoming a king and conquering lands and all this kind of stuff. And you're playing through that at the same time that you're moving the fish over. And it is in the same way that he's daydreaming while he's doing this monotonous work. Your mouse movement becomes muscle memory. Like, you forget that you're even canning fish while you're playing this segment, even though you're doing it over and over and over again. It becomes mindless, and it puts you in the exact mindset that he's supposed to be in this sequence, which I thought was just genius.
Yeah, it's actually, it really is incredible. It's such a good use of the medium, too. And it gets to a point where basically his imagination continues to expand to where it's literally the full size of the screen, but you're still responsible for doing this fish canning, and you don't even see the fish anymore, yet it's become so mindless that, like you said, you have this muscle memory of just like knowing when the fish will come and when you need to move it and where you need to place it, while the full screen is you moving around in the world. It's kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the ending to the game now? Because I feel like we didn't cover every single thing in it, but I don't see why we need to.
Sure.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and describe how the game ends?
So I will say this is the first time I've played a baby coming out of a birth canal. So that was something.
For sure.
So what ends up happening is Edith happens to be pregnant as she's going on this little adventure, and then the final diary entry in the house is her writing basically her recap of what had happened and starting talking about the night that they left the house, because of a whole bunch of different reasons. The ending of the game, as I mentioned, you become a baby coming out of her birth canal, which is really something. But then it flashes forward a little bit, and you're actually playing as her son, who, because she dies, and he has to bury her back at the house.
Yeah, so it's just continuing this cycle. Is the curse real? Who knows? But I think by this point the game hasn't even you're not even questioning it anymore. Like it's just a given that every single family member is going to die in some bizarre way, you know.
And
it
then I
happens to
thought,
you.
and so that's depressing. And then just to really hit you right in the gut, it turns out that this whole game was in memory of, I'm assuming, the game director's wife who passed away.
Oh yeah. Uh,
Which is an interesting experience because it puts this game into a different. I mean, not entirely, but when I saw that, it you can kind of see the perspective that he approached the development of this game in, because it is in a way very celebratory in kind of understanding your past, understanding mortality, and like moving on. But in the same sense, you can tell that there's a very, that there's a depression and this gloom that hangs over, as well as you're dealing with grief. And the cycle of death that continues also is something that feels very powerful, given the fact that he probably is also dealing with this grief and having to cope and understand.
yeah, for sure. Do we want to wrap it up and give the final thoughts on this game?
Yeah, this is a pretty short one. I guess that's the other thing to mention.
Yeah, it
You
took
can
me
go ahead and
4 hours to beat it like in
you could
one
probably
sitting.
take the spoiler tag down.
Oh yeah, that's right. I almost forgot about that. Yeah, okay.
Welcome back, everyone. So the last thing I wanted to mention is that this is a pretty short game. So if anyone is interested in playing this, it only took me about like 4 or 5 hours, maybe not even that. You can get through it pretty briskly, but it's a really but that doesn't demerit it at all. It's a very succinct, and it tells its story exactly as long as it needs to. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and it wraps up very nicely at the end. There's even kind of like a new game plus-ish mode, sort of a thing. I didn't really get into that.
I think
And then
it's just
also
you get to
you can
select
play
this.
any of the stories.
Yeah, at any point, yeah.
Okay, so we'll give our thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so I really enjoyed this experience. This is definitely one of my favorites in the genre. I also recently played Gone Home, which is very good in the same oeuvre, but this, I think, moved me in a different way. It made me very depressed, which I think is one of the things that it was going for. Not the only thing it was going for, but each one was very sad. Some of them were like really, really sad. Some of the little stories of the family. I would probably give this a probably around a 9, I think. Um, Top to bottom, the game looks beautiful. It sounds great. All the vocal work is really wonderful. The way that the story progresses is very interesting, and there's more gameplay than you would probably expect out of the genre as well. It's not just strictly walking around and uncovering things. There are little gameplay segments scattered throughout, which are kind of interesting and fun. The other thing I would say is it moved me. It was a powerful story, and it was a pretty recent game to come out too. So if you're looking for it, I think it was free for a little while in the Epic Games Store, but it probably will make its way into Humble Bundles and such soon as well. But I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah. So I actually don't know what score I would give this. I really, at minimum it's a 9, but it could also be a 10. I don't know. I played through it once, and I feel like if I really wanted to say how I felt on that front, I'd have to play it again, which I didn't get the chance to do. But when I finish this game, whenever I experience something that's kind of in this oeuvre that I feel like truly blows my mind, that like truly truly took me to another place in a way that I don't frequently experience. I always come out of the first experience feeling really empty and kind of confused, and I'm always like, I don't know, what did I think of that? And then as time goes on and I think about what I experienced, I realize how much it actually impacted me. And this game totally had that effect on me when I played it. I mean, you know, from every technical aspect, it's done extremely well. I did get I did get a little glitch where I ended up in the cat sequence. I ended up getting stuck in a chair. And it was right in the path that you could move in. I mean, I was able to get out, but it was not something that was intended to happen. So it seems like the game isn't 100% robust. But you know, it was not a big problem. It didn't have to make me restart or anything. And just the act of playing this is amazing. It's like really, really moving. And yeah, I mean, I can't recommend this enough. Like, you don't have to like video games to play this because my mic is going up. I hope that my voice wasn't getting quieter there, everyone. I don't feel like you have to like video games to play this because you don't need any skill or anything. You can almost look at it like an interactive story, really. It's just telling you a story. And that's kind of the entire point. So I mean, if you have a PC and you can play this, do it. Like, seriously, this is really good. And yeah, I mean, I'll say this. Go ahead and pick a 9 or a 10 for me if that's the score you want me to give it. If you want me to give it a 9, then I give it a 9. If you want me to give it a 10, I give it a 10. I can't decide, so it's fine. All right, anyway, I think we should move on. Yeah.
What about a 9.5?
Yeah, I mean, I could say 9.5, but I'm the only... I don't know. Like, I feel like it might be a 10 is all I'm saying. I don't want to nail down a score because I'm honestly not certain. So, if you want me to give it a 9.5, I give it that too. So, there you go. Anyway, let's move on, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead and explain what you recommended to me, Stephen.
So I recommended to you the video game Cuphead. Cuphead was a game that felt like was in development for quite a long time, but it was by Studio MDHR. They're actually two brothers, and then they contracted a whole bunch of people to help them. Cuphead is a run-and-gun action platformer. You play as the title character Cuphead, and you can play co-op, and the co-op partner plays as Mugman. But it's definitely in the style of old cartoons. It's all hand-drawn and hand-animated. And the general gist of the small story is you made a deal with the devil, and you got to take him down, baby.
Yeah, and okay, so this is Cuphead. This game got so much press. Like, obviously, I knew it existed. I'd seen people kind of play it. I know that this thing was like super popular when it came out, and I also know that it was in development for a really long time because you had told me that. And it was like, you know, I don't know how long it took, but I can totally see where all that effort went because, I mean, the fact that it was hand drawn and the animation is so smooth it looks digital. I mean, this must have taken, you know, a lot of time.
Yeah, and I really want to stress that it is hand drawn frame by frame, individually framed out, hand drawn, and then digitized every single portion of this video game.
Yeah, no, and it looks amazing. Visually, this thing is just stellar. It's like it perfectly captures all of those old cartoon styles, and it makes the world feel, I don't know, it's unique. You know, I'm not saying no game's ever kind of done this sort of animation style, but to this extent, I doubt it. It's really impressive. Yeah, so I guess the one thing that I heard about this game a lot before I went into play it was that it was exceptionally difficult. And it is definitely hard. This game is very hard. I struggled a lot. I think the coolest thing there, difficulty-wise, is that I really wouldn't put this game up there with, like, the all-time hardest ever or something like that. It's not like among the games where I think of like a game that's just insanely hard. It's really fair. And I feel like once you get down the pattern of a stage or of a boss fight, you realize it's not really being unfair to you. It's not really that hard. It's actually, I feel like the game is, its difficulty is very well balanced. I'll put it that way, right? Like, its difficulty is part of the reason why I think I was enjoying playing this so much, because first of all, I never got frustrated. I would play through, and I guess it's worth noting that the game's kind of like a run and gun, so, you shoot little stuff from your fingers, you can upgrade your weapons and stuff like that. And it's split into run and gun stages and then boss battles, which are separate, and you'd play them at your own pace. There are a lot more boss battles than the run and gun stages that I got through anyway.
Yeah, this game was originally supposed to just be a boss rush.
Yeah, which makes sense, because, well, I'll get to that. But I feel like every boss, I would die so many times on these bosses, but and maybe get a little peeved, but I never got frustrated. I was never angry with the game, because I always felt like I was actually accomplishing something, even if I died. I felt like I was learning the boss more. I was learning their patterns. I was getting farther and farther into fighting them every time, and eventually I was able to beat them with relative ease after a certain point. And I'm not very good at video games, so that says something, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the mechanics on this are so robust. Like, I initially thought the parry mechanic was really inconsistent, but then I realized how you're supposed to use it, and actually it's very consistent and works very well. And things, and like, yeah, I mean, your move set is so limited that there's nothing confusing about playing this. It's really natural. And, yeah. Is there anything you want to say about what I just said?
No, I definitely agree. This game is hard. Like, make no mistake. It's going to take you a while to get through some of the bosses. But it's fair. I'll say most of the time. There are two bosses that have some random elements that are also disjoint from the boss itself that can really kind of just mess you up in ways that are like, well, there was no way I could have dodged that, really.
I guess I haven't gotten there yet then.
But for the most part, so the boss that I think of specifically is the bee boss. She has some stuff that's like independent of her that can basically trap you in. I mean, if you're good enough, you can dodge it, and obviously there's a lot of ways to do so. And also the dragon boss. Those two are the two that come to mind to me that were the hardest because of some disjoint hitboxes that are kind of random. But the thing about this game is, as you play it and you yourself get better and you memorize patterns and you understand when to dodge and how to parry, you only get better, and the game only becomes like you only kind of get into a rhythm. It's so I'll say a lot of the bosses are really unique. The animation style, I think, is absolutely hands down probably the defining characteristic of this game. Just all the small animations and everything that the bosses do is really funny. And I think the thing about this game that really, I think, strives you to continue to play is, as you play a boss, you have no idea really their health. They go through stages, and then if you die, it'll show you how far you got to defeating them. And so that's kind of a little bit of a motivating factor, which is fun.
Yeah, because if you're playing for a while and you almost beat a boss and you feel like you were playing forever, and then you see when you die that you were like right there at the end, you just like, okay, I'm gonna try that again. Yeah, I agree. That was a really good thing to add. But not having a health meter on the bosses was also great because it doesn't distract you, right? Like, you're focused the whole time, assuming that you're getting closer and closer, but you're not going to be staring at their health meter or something.
Yeah, that's one thing to mention too. The screen is so clean. You're not really cluttered by any UI elements or anything. It's just you and the boss and whatever crap the boss is throwing at you.
Which is a lot.
Deal with. Yeah, which is a lot of times a lot.
Yeah.
We should also mention that most of the segments are on foot, but there are a couple bosses and a couple segments when you're in a little plane, and it becomes more of a kind of traditional bullet hell, or sort of like Gradius in a way. and those are kind of interesting too.
Yeah, and the plane
And
stuff was fun. I thought I played I think 3 bosses with it. Yeah.
Yeah, the mechanics change a little bit. Like you can shrink yourself. That's kind of how you dodge now and stuff like that.
Yeah. I also played a little bit around with the upgrades and stuff. Like there's the shop where you get coins in the running gun, and also on the main screen you can find some on the hub world, I should say. And you know, getting upgrades and having new weapons to use is also really fun. I was playing around a little bit with that. I feel like the basic gun you get is perfectly fine, but the other upgrades are like actually useful, and they're actually stuff you'd like want to use, which is nice to see. And same thing with like the abilities you can have, and also the supers that you unlock by playing these mausoleum mini games, which are really fun, where you kind of like deflect ghosts away from touching an urn. So there's a lot of, I mean, I feel like there's a decent amount of variety.
And to talk to that variety, I think ultimately I didn't switch out as much as I probably could have. I think I ended up finding like one set of, because you can swap out in match between 2 different guns. So I found like one set that really worked for me well, one ability that really worked for me well, and I just kind of stuck with it. But yeah, you could definitely play around, and I'm sure people have found different uses for different guns. There's one, for instance, where it like arcs behind you, and if you face the other way and hit with it, then it does more damage. There's one that kind of has homing bullets, but it does less damage. There's one that's kind of like a shotgun, and it does a whole bunch of damage up close, but it has a little range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean...
the other thing that I really like about this game is all the personality that the game has. So one, in just the animation style, but every character has their own personality. All the bosses are kind of unique and really bring a lot to the game. The individual characters, so Cuphead and Mugman, are just really well-designed characters. And then the Urn Lady, who actually is getting some DLC, I think that's supposed to launch the end of this year, where you can play as her. And I think there's a couple other bosses. But King Dice is really great, and the Devil. Those are really great characters that you encounter on a couple times, and you ultimately have to fight them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the one I wanted to mention, because you brought it up, this is why I thought of it. The shopkeeper.
Oh yeah,
the shopkeeper is amazing.
Yeah, the big guy. Yeah.
The big pig dude.
Yeah, and like also in the hub world, there's just like a bunch of little characters just sitting around you can talk to, and some of them you like do little quests for in the hub world and stuff. The hub world, the hub world has a little bit of fun elements to it too, because for one thing, the progression through it isn't totally linear, so you can kind of progress about it in your own way. And also there are like little shortcuts you can find in each world and stuff like that. So a lot of really neat stuff. You know, even just going level to level is actually kind of fun, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, for instance, in the second hub world, there's like a barbershop quartet, but they're missing a member. And if you find the member, then they sing you a little song. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I guess something that I didn't quite like. I feel like the running gun segments felt kind of slapdash to me. They're fun, but compared to the amount of character and gameplay elements that the bosses bring, these segments just feel pretty secondary, in my opinion. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, I agree. They're definitely not as fun as the bosses. I think the bosses are much more interesting in general.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of work went into it and everything, but I just felt like a lot of the enemy types and stuff were kind of boring and didn't really do much. And the most trouble I had on a running gun segment was like on the first one, because I was getting used to the game. And after that, they're really not that hard. Like, I found them to be the easiest stuff that I had to do, to be honest. You know, maybe you die like once or twice, but it really isn't that bad compared to the bosses where you basically have to die to keep playing and keep learning. I don't feel like you really need to do that on these running gun segments, so I wasn't too crazy about that. But I will say, thankfully, these segments really are not the crux of the game. There's like 2 of them in each world, if I'm correct. I mean, I've seen 2 of the different hub worlds so far. I haven't beaten the game, just to be clear. And there were 2 running guns in each, so I'm assuming it's not crazy. But there's a lot more bosses, yeah. And those are so much fun.
Somebody in the chat is asking to rank the bosses from worst to best.
You would have to do that. I can't.
Do you mean in my enjoyment, or
Probably.
what do you mean? I'll put that question out, and then we can get back to it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I think other things about this game, Lewis, someone I know in the chat had also mentioned this before. Do we want to talk at all about the controversy that kind of surrounded this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll I'll clear it up because it's really dumb and nothing actually happened. If we want to talk about it. I mean, people made a big stink about some article titles, but they didn't even read the articles. Go read the articles that people were talking about racist implications in the game, and you realize nothing actually happened. Nobody called the game racist. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
There you go. The controversy was a bunch of people making a big stink because when they see the word racist, it upsets them. Which
and just to talk about it a little bit,
I fell victim to at the time, but you know,
because this game definitely takes heavy inspiration from the Rubber Hose animation and like Fleischer Studios, and there's some racist undertones definitely in those old cartoons, but
again, not undertones. No. Overtones.
No. There are definitely overtones.
Yeah, overtones. In those old cartoons, overtones. Oh yeah.
Yeah, but again, this game is just taking
the
inspiration from this.
Yeah, so the thing that some of the articles brought up, and I guess it's an interesting conversation, I guess, they weren't saying that the game is racist. They were just saying, what are the implications of, you know, because like the whole dice thing, if you look at these old cartoons, that was just a racist stereotype. That was the whole point of the dice plot. Like the devil would, like black people in these cartoons would be portrayed as like they were just dumb idiots going to gamble, and they would gamble with dice, and then, you know, they'd get a deal with the devil. You know, and so you basically substituted the black people in these cartoons, the horrible, horrible portrayal of black people in these cartoons, with Cuphead and Mugman. You know, but nobody that I saw, maybe like some very small people on Twitter, possibly, but not in these articles. Nobody that I saw was suggesting that that was necessarily a bad thing on the game's point. They're just like trying to discuss what the implications of that are. But I feel like it is. I would say that on that front, it's fair that, you know, I think substituting the bad shit with and just keeping all the good stuff really isn't that bad. I don't think it's a bad thing that people talked about it, but I don't think that, you know, I don't know if anybody thought that the game actually did anything wrong. So anyway, yeah, he says enjoyment. So can you actually do that? Do you know all the bosses to be able to do that?
I have a list here. I would say I'm just going to give probably the one I enjoyed the most and the one I enjoyed the least. Because there are a lot of bosses. I don't know how I would rank them individually. But I think for me, I definitely enjoyed, just because I got so frustrated, the B boss the least. That one took me a long time. That one, and again, like I said, the dragon one probably took me the longest. The ones that I enjoyed the most, I really liked the genie boss a lot. I really liked the root pack a lot. I thought that was a really interesting one. Or I don't know what they're called. It's like 3 bosses that are like vegetables. And I really liked the train one a lot. That one's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, of the ones I played, I think my favorite was probably hell, that's tough. God, I don't even know. There wasn't a single one I didn't enjoy that I've played yet. Like, they were all really fun.
Even the most basic boss is a lot of fun. The one who's basically just a big slime from Dragon Quest.
Yeah, Dragon Quest. Yeah.
The other one that came to... so many of them are so good, but I really like Sally's stage play, where you're fighting in like on a theater. That one's really cool. And the one with the rat who turns out to... And then the cat comes and eats him, and you have to fight the cat. That one's a lot of fun too. So I don't know, so many of them are just really interesting and unique fights that they're all really memorable.
I'll tell you what, my that bird in the bird box, that one gave me a lot of shit. That was very hard. And it wasn't even, it was like that was one of the ones where I feel like it was actually hardest in the first sequence, and that's what would fuck me up, because it shoots these eggs kind of randomly that then hit the other side of the screen and go off in 3 directions. There's other stuff coming at you at the same time. And this segment, I was always bound to take a hit. So then later on, I was pretty much screwed. Part of the challenge is just trying not to get hit early on, because if you get hit early on, you're pretty much bound to get fucked later. You want to save your health so that you can deal with the harder bits, you know? And actually, for the most part, I felt like the bosses did have a really good difficulty curve where they actually did get harder from sequence to sequence. Which was a good way to keep you invested into, it especially made it satisfying when you beat the bosses. And that's actually something I wanted to stress, is I feel like one of the best things about playing this game is that it's just so damn satisfying when you beat a boss that gave you a lot of trouble, you know? I've played games before that are so frustrating that when you finally win, it doesn't even feel good. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where it's
for sure.
And in this game, it's like, it feels great when you beat a boss. It's so exciting. I was always just so happy when I beat a boss in this game, and so that's
good. And
I
don't know if you felt this, but this is one of the first games that made me feel this. Like, after you beat a boss and like you take a hit and you see you didn't get a perfect rating. I didn't end up doing it because it's like so hard, but it was one of the games where it was like, oh man, you know, I could have gone back and I could have done this better, and I might be able to do that. I might be able to get the S rank on this.
Yeah, which is, by the way, that's a task I'm gonna avoid for most of these bosses.
And just to
fucking with that.
And just to let you know, Lewis, if you beat the game, you actually basically get like a new game plus hard mode.
It's like expert. I heard about that. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So I watched some extra boss fights, and I watched a video where somebody ranked them from hardest to from easiest to hardest on expert mode, getting an S rank. So I've kind of seen all the bosses and what they all are, but I do intend to finish the game. I just didn't get the chance to do that yet. But I had a blast playing it. Like, yeah.
And I would recommend to anyone, because I think it's just so incredible to watch. At Games Done Quick, the Mexican runner now for 2 years in a row has run this game, a speed run this game, and it's just such a treat to watch. It's incredible.
I'll have to check that out, actually. That sounds interesting. Yeah. Okay, I mean, we're a little early in terms of Get Recc'd lengths, but I think we're pretty much ready to wrap this one up, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and say, if I didn't finish the game, so my score, let's say this is a score in progress. And I'm not really good at scoring video games anyway, and I don't think I really will be so long as I don't play a lot of them. But, you know, in terms of my enjoyment, I give this like an 8, I would say, probably. The best thing about the game, I think, is, I mean, first of all, the bosses are super fun, but really it is all in the visuals and just the style of the presentation here, which is so phenomenal. The amount of work that went into this is incredible. Like, I can't, it's seriously hard for me to believe that everything's hand drawn, because it's so smoothly animated. I will say that the game feels, due to the amount of time it must have taken and the small team that they had, because they had a pretty small team, correct? I'm pretty sure they did.
Yeah, they did.
I would hope that they could get a much larger team and make a sequel, honestly, because this seems like a game that could really be expanded upon. Right now, the most robust element to me seemed to be the bosses, and everything else felt pretty secondary, which isn't to say that the running and gunning stuff wasn't fun, but it just wasn't nearly as impressive. And that was pretty much all there was. There was also the mausoleum stuff. So you had some different gameplay elements, but really the only one that really stood out was the boss battles. I would love to see a Cuphead 2 where they iron this out, make the run and gun stuff better, come up with new ways to play the game, new different little game modes. And I could see this game, like, them making a really, really phenomenal game. You know, to me, this seems like a game that took a ton of time, and so they weren't really able to iron out everything about it, which is perfectly understandable. But I would love to see if that could be expanded upon. Not that, although I hate to ask it of them, because I'm sure that no matter how big of a team you get, it's going to take a long time to get a sequel like that out. But still, I'd like to see it. And yes, I would definitely recommend it, because I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and I give this one a 9. I really, really enjoy this game. It's really not that long, honestly. I think it only ended up taking me a couple hours. It feels long when you're playing it because you're dying and you're having to restart, but you can get through it in not too much time if you get good. I think that, as Lewis mentioned, the animation style to me is probably the most interesting and fun part of the whole experience, and just seeing all the bosses and their nuance and seeing all the boss transitions for the first time is really cool, especially, like I mentioned, some of them, like with the where you're fighting a rat, then a cat comes in, now you're fighting the cat, and that's cool. And then it turns out the rat's actually piloting the cat as a robot. So those sorts of things are just really interesting. And there's a whole bunch of character in the game. And it got to the point where for the king dice fight, you can like basically fast track through it. But just because I wanted to see everything, I took my time and did all the segments. If you've gotten to the king dice fight, you probably know what I talk about, but I won't spoil that one because that one's kind of cool.
Right.
I think the reason why I give it a 9 and not something higher is, as Lewis mentioned, the run and gun segments are a bit of a, like, I feel like they definitely were kind of tacked on, and they're fun, but they're not anything really interesting. If they wanted to make just a succinct, short experience of just boss rush, which I think they initially intended, I could definitely have seen them doing that. And I don't know if I would have increased my score necessarily, because like I said, the run and gun segments don't drag it down, but they are something that I just didn't find as enjoyable. They're just kind of filler for no really apparent reason necessarily.
They are fun though. I don't want to drag on them too much. They are fun.
So I will say my score is somewhat a score with an asterisk as well, because I've never played this co-op, and I've heard that is a really fun and enjoyable experience that you should probably experience before like really doing a full assessment. So I've never been able to do that, so I'll leave that to the side. But just single player, it's a ton of fun just to go through this whole thing as well.
Yeah, and that's
and I'll say this is one of the games that I've actually started and completed, and that's something that doesn't happen very often for me anymore. So that probably says something. And it is just a very simple experience at its core, and I think that's why it's so engaging.
Yeah, and I think we both really loved this game. Loved this game. I haven't finished it, so that's cool. Do we want to move on now?
Yep.
All right. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get to our recommendations, and Stephen, I'll go first. I am recommending to you the album Rodeo by Travis Scott. Travis Scott is a trap artist from this decade. He came up working with Kanye West as a producer, I think on Yeezus, if I'm not mistaken. Made a few mixtapes, and then his first debut record was Rodeo. And that's all I'll say about that. Okay. And what do you got for me?
Okay, Lewis, I'm recommending to you something that's a little different, and logistically, we're going to have to figure out how it's going to work. Those at home, I don't know how you'll play along with this one, but Lewis, I'm recommending to you Hamilton, the musical. Specifically, I'll recommend to you, so those at home who can't see it, the original Broadway cast album. I think, Lewis, you have seen it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and I will have seen it as well by the time we record. So we'll talk a little bit about it, the actual musical itself, in the podcast probably next week. But we'll try to stick as much as we can just to particularly talking about the songs that are on the track album. For most people at home, you should be able to see at least snips of some of probably what we'll talk about from the actual musical itself. So we'll try to stick to those that are most readily available, so that way those at home can kind of play along with us. But just to give everyone a heads up, we will be talking about spoilers, and we will probably be talking about the actual elements of the musical itself.
Yeah, okay. And I think that with that does it. Right? Hold up. Let me get this thing going on. Here it is. All right, what are we looking at? A trap artist. Who are you and what have you done with the real Lewis? Ha ha. What am I supposed to say about that? Hamilton does have Daveed Diggs from Clipping in it. Yeah. In a version that I didn't see, because the Broadway one. I mean, I don't think he's in it anymore, but he was originally. I think Steven would probably know more about that than me. Do you know about Daveed Diggs?
Yes.
Yeah. He was in the original run of it, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in the original Broadway cast, and he played Lafayette and also Thomas Jefferson, and he will be on that cast album that you'll be listening to.
Right, yeah. Looking through some of this stuff. Yeah, okay. I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know if you have anything to say, Steven.
Nope, I think that kind of wraps us up for this week.
All right, sweet. Well, with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.